Very,
Thank you. I like yours.
was a full moon last night.
Yeah, you can tell.
I don't like it, but I don't get a vote.
You sound like my wife.
Have you had yours forever?
Yes.
See?
He just grew his last fall.
Gives me character.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to yet another Tuesday night program with Rabbi Pinchas Landis. It's so good to have you all here. It's a pleasure, as always, to continue in the Jewish Destiny series. And but before we delve into our topic for tonight, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to everybody for participating, for helping, for volunteering, for donating, for whatever you did to help to make sure that the Pillars of Faith campaign was a success. As I said in a little video that I sent out, whether or not you watched it, that there is no way we could have done it without all of you. And therefore, we truly appreciate everything everybody did. We were overwhelmed by the response, overwhelmed that we met our goal, which we knew that we, as opposed to a lot of these campaigns, you shoot kind of low, you play it safe. We knew we were shooting kind of high with our number. And we not only met our goal of raising $300,000 for Partners Cleveland, but we surpassed it. The total as of now, you can't really see it on the page anymore, or you can see where the page stopped collecting donations, but we're at about $313,000, which is tremendous. We're very excited about that. And the one thing I have to say about this whole thing is that if you really want to see the hand of God, run a 33-hour fundraising campaign for a nonprofit, and you see it. I mean, I have so many stories already. I'm going to probably write a book about it, but it was very exciting, and I just want to thank you all. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for volunteering and donating and sharing it and coming to the event, and just really from the bottom of my heart, I do appreciate it. One quick public service announcement of an upcoming event we have on Thursday evening. I'm just going to share the flyer for everyone to see here for a moment. Thursday evening is our third annual Mindy Klein Memorial Lecture. As many of you know, Mindy Klein of blessed memory was the founder of Partners Cleveland. He's the one who is guilty for bringing me to town. So if you want someone to blame, it is him. And therefore, one of the ways we have memorialized him on his yard site, which is Lag BaOmer, we always have a memorial lecture. This being, by always, it's the third time. In Jewish thought and Jewish law, once you do something 3 times, it's what's called a chazaka. It's a strengthened action, a strengthened custom, and therefore you always got to do it. So as of this year, this will be the official policy, the official custom. And I hope you'll join us. It's going to be 8:30 p.m. Thursday evening, and it's going to be streaming live from TorahAnytime.com/PITC. And the other 2 speakers, if you're not familiar with them, one is Rabbi Yy Jacobson, who has been labeled the Jewish Billy Graham. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult, but he happens to be an absolutely great speaker. He's fascinating, he's brilliant, and he's hilarious. And he was also a very close friend of Mindy's. So we're very excited to have him participate. And then, excuse me, Rabbi Tzvi Gluck, who runs an organization called Amudim that was founded by Mindy. And Tzvi was the founding director. There's a whole story on how Tzvi got that job and how that came to be. But Amudim is pillars in Hebrew, similar to our Pillars of Faith campaign we just had. But it quite simply put, it is an organization that takes care of all of the issues that all the other organizations don't want to take care of. Quite simply, they deal with issues of from abuse, both physical abuse to drug abuse drug overdoses, as far flung as when someone needs to get to Israel and they lost their passport, they help them get passports, all kinds of things. But a lot of their focus is in the mental health area with dealing with victims of abuse and people who suffer from drug addictions and things like that. So it's really amazing. It's not a pleasant place to work, but it is amazing work, and it's one of Mindy's legacies. So we'll be the three speakers, and that's Thursday evening. So with no further ado, we will jump into tonight's topic. I'm going to, in the chat box here, I'm going to share the outline for anyone who would like to follow. This is our outline. What is the name of the Amudim? It's on the flyer. One of the logos on the flyer is Amudim, Amudim. So, okay, so let's rock and roll. So as we pick up, I want to pick up exactly where we left off last week. So, this is advertised and promoted as a Jewish history class. By the way, we've expanded the name a little bit. It's now not just the Jewish Destiny series. It is the Jerry and Carol Harris Jewish Destiny series. I'm going to embarrass Jerry a little bit because his camera's turned off. Jerry has been a longtime dear friend of mine, friend, student, whatever you want to call it. We've been studying together for the better part of the past 15 years, and we've continued to study even though we don't live in the same city. And we formed such a close friendship, and really a part of the family that's what the Harrises are with the Landis family. And he's a lover of history, like I'm a lover of history. So as part of the campaign, he endowed this series. So we want to thank him. So you'll see that now on all the flyers. It's the Jerry and Carol Harris Jewish Destiny series. So it is supposed to be a history series, but as I said in the introduction to the series, the plan is to cover all 81 years of Jewish history by the time we finish the series. Now, at the rate that we're going, it's going to take us about 801 years, because so far we did the introduction, we did the 6 days of creation, we did the the sixth day of creation last week with the creation of mankind and the experience in the garden. And we haven't been moving too quickly. So anyone is wondering, Rabbi, how in the world are we going to move through Jewish history at any type of pace or get anything covered? You'll see tonight, because tonight we are all of a sudden right here at the beginning of the lecture, we are going to jump from the Jewish year 1, which was correspondent to the secular year 3760 before the Common Era. We're going to jump from the Jewish year 1 to the Jewish year 1656, corresponding to 2105 before the Common Era. So that's how we're going to do it. There's going to be certain parts of history where we will move kind of quickly, and we're going to cover those 1656 years in about 2 minutes. So basically, right where we ended off last week is where we'll pick up is the statement of our sages from Pirkei Avos, from the Ethics of Our Fathers, which says, Asara doros me Adam v'ad Noach. There were 10 generations from Noah to Adam. From Adam to Noah. And if, as we all know, a generation means father, son, mother, daughter, right? Parent, child. That's what we're calling a generation. So there are 10 links in the chain, so to speak, from Adam until Noah. To know how the mercy of the Almighty. Each one of them really annoyed the Almighty, right? Each one of them was worthy of being destroyed until finally the Almighty brought the flood onto the planet. And then, that's the first part. We'll save the second part of the Mishnah for the end of the lecture. So basically, we're told that Noah was 10 generations into the world. Now, if we look at it just as if we go macro for a minute, we had 10 generations from Adam till Noah. Then we have another 10 generations from Noah till Abraham. And then we have 6 generations from Abraham until the Exodus and until the Jews stand at Mount Sinai and receive the Torah. So, as we know that there are no coincidences at all in the world. And if you're doing your math, which I'm sure my father is, that number that I just gave you adds up to 26, right? There were 26 generations essentially from the creation of the world to the Jews who see the Torah at Mount Sinai. Now that also happens to be the gematria, the numerical value of Yud Kei Vav Kei, of Hashem's name of mercy, right? We spell the name Hashem, which we say when we're praying as Ado and then Noi. That is the attribute, as the different names of Hashem represent the different attributes of Hashem, that represents divine mercy. The idea that our our Father in heaven, the Almighty, is a merciful God. So the idea, one of the ideas conveyed over there is that these first 26 generations of the world existed on pure mercy, because as we're seeing here, they were not deserving of too much. There were some shining lights, as we'll see and we'll cover, but they weren't so deserving. So it was 26 words. We understand that the Almighty sustained the world on pure kindness, and then once the ideas of the Torah come into the world, then the world exists only on merit, and the merit of mankind. And from that point forward. So this is also corresponds to if you are a regular morning regular Shabbos morning shul goer, or at least a Shabbos morning davener, and you say the Pesukei de Zimra section on Shabbos, the introductory section to the services on Shabbos morning, there is a famous psalm that we say, which is referred to quite often in rabbinical literature as Hallel Hagadol, as the big praise, because what we do is we say in that section of Psalms, we say the words Ki Leolam Chasto 26 times. So it starts off Hodel Hashem Ki Tov, Ki Leolam Chasto, Yomerna Hashem, Ki Leolam Chasto, and we go on mentioning essentially a bunch of great kindnesses of the Almighty, and we end each one with saying the words Ki Leolam Chasto. For anyone who has an Art Scroll Siddur handy, this is on page 384. And if you're just looking at a book of Psalms, this is Psalm number 136. So that's how it goes. Hodel Hashem ki tov, ki leolam chasto. Give thanks to God for his good, his kindness is forever. Hodel Elokim, ki leolam chasto. We go on singing all these praises 26 times. Again, that magic number one more time, 26 times. So our sages say that when King David wrote the psalm, he had in mind these 26 generations that the Almighty sustained the world through pure kindness until he had essentially a plan, until he had an element of mankind to work with. And that's where we're getting down to really tonight. So these 10 generations between Adam and Noach were essentially, as we're going to see, were not worthy of much, right? Now, what does that mean? Let's take that concept apart for a moment. Last week we talked about Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. It's safe to say that Adam and Eve started off as monotheists, right? They believed in one God and that they had a certain amount of interaction with that God. Whether they were full-blown prophets or just had partial prophecy is a discussion amongst the Kabbalists. But be it as it may, Adam and Eve start off as an extremely exalted state. And even though they fall from that state, they still, we would argue, and it's safe to argue and safe to assume they were monotheists their whole life. Now, at this time, 10 generations later, get roughly, 1,652 years later, the world is a polytheistic world. We see that polytheism is rampant in the world. And when we talk about polytheism, we're not just talking about one God versus many gods, right? If you're a monotheist, you believe in one God. If you're a polytheist, you believe in many gods. It's much broader than that. It's a polytheism. If you ever study the ancient polytheistic cultures, and again, I'm painting broad strokes here and overgeneralizing on purpose because, hey, I have the floor so I can do it. The polytheism is not just multiple gods. It is a culture of anarchy. It is a culture of strength over weakness. It is a culture of whatever I say rules, and whatever I think the world should look like is what I'm going to make the world look like. And so therefore, as part of that, mankind would develop gods to essentially look like themselves and act like themselves, as you see by reading Greek mythology, that it's a toss-up. What has more drama, Greek mythology about the gods or Greek mythology about the people? And there's always the interaction of the two. And that's what polytheism was. It was a culture of literally survival of the fittest, of strong versus the weak, and really Machiavellian in more ways than one. So somehow the world goes from Adam to the generation Noah, and is a world that the Chumash tells us is Malei Haaretz Chamas, that the world is full of what we call Chamas. Now, if we read that with a little bit more of a, I'm reading with my Lithuanian Ashkenazi slur over here, but if we read it a little bit differently, that word that is describing, if you're curious, we're referencing, we're at actually the end of Parshas Bereshis, we're at chapter 6 in the book of Genesis. It says over there that you know what? My wife gave me a hard time because last week I took too long to look up quotes, and I actually marked them this week, but my eyes just not catching them quickly. So I apologize. So in the final video, we'll edit me looking for quotes out of here. But here we go. I'm actually in the beginning of Parshas Noach. This is chapter 6, verse 13. It says, "Vayomer Elokim leNoach, Kitz kol basar ba lefanai," that the end of mankind has come before me. Ki malei haaretz chamas. So if we put the accent a little bit different, it could be Hamas, right? Ches, Mem, Samech, with a patach under both the Ches and the Mem, Hamas. Now, that's one of those strange coincidences in Jewish history that means absolutely nothing, right? Obviously, one of the great tormentors of Jewish history, of the Jewish people today, is the organization known to us as Hamas. And I don't know if their PR department knew that what the Hebrew word Hamas meant when they chose that as the name of their organization. I don't know, maybe they did, because Hamas in Hebrew means if you translate sort of loosely, it would mean, and I'll give you the Art Scroll translation here, it means robbery. But it's not robbery like a petty theft a petty thief on the street, like a mugger. This is like armed robbery. This is like assault rifles. This is like brutally beating people up and killing them and doing whatever it takes to get their belongings. That's what was going on in the world. And again, the present day terrorist group of Hamas, applies the same tactics in their way of going. By the way, if you're wondering where they did get the name from, Hamas is the acronym in Arabic for the words Harakat al-Makwana al-Islami, which means Islamic resistance movement. So I don't know if, again, it's a coincidence or it's just they wanted to pick on the Hebrew because a lot of them are fluent in Hebrew, but the word is similar. But that's what the world looks like. The world goes from Adam and just out of the Garden of Eden, which granted was not the Garden of Eden, but was still a pretty lofty existence, to 10 generations later. Just like, the way I imagine it is, if you grew up like I did with the great theological work of the Back to the Future series, you'll remember in Back to the Future Part 2, when Marty McFly takes the DeLorean back to the dystopian 1985 and Biff is in charge. It's quite dystopian, right? It's disgusting, and the world is driven by gamblers, and there's police that are owned by the gamblers, and Malayar's Hamas. That's like how I imagine it over there. So but how did that happen? Seriously, how do we get from a very lofty place to, again, I know 1,500 years, 1,600 years sounds like a long time, and we're going to address the whole idea of the length of time that people lived, but at least generationally, 10 generations, not that long. Now, 10 generations nowadays, we probably say is, a couple hundred years, but still, how did it become so decrepit so fast? So the way that Maimonides describes it is that, yes, in fact, the world started off as a monotheistic world. Adam was a monotheist, Eve was a monotheist, and, we'll give him the benefit of a doubt that he remained a monotheist his whole entire life. But what happens is that there is definitely a disconnection between mankind and spirituality from essentially the expulsion from the garden until Noach, and for sure until Abraham. And with that spiritual exile, if you will, people start off believing in one God, but they would think that one God for the sun, and they would think that one God for the moon and the trees and the water and the oxygen and Coca-Cola or whatever they would think that one God for. But as they became a little, one generation removed, 2 generations removed, 3 generations removed, slightly less sophisticated, not able to think on the same level, they would all of a sudden start to put the power in the sun, not behind an omnipotent, omniscient, all-knowing, all-powerful, almighty God that they could not see, but say, oh, no, it's really the sun itself that has the power. And the sun always is, was, and will be. And that's where the power comes from. And then they would deify the sun, and they'd say there's the God of the sun and the God of the moon and the God of the waters. And that's how the Rambam says that the world slipped into a world of polytheism. And it was only once people were essentially able to create their own gods, then gods became man-driven. And at that point, man rules, power rules, Machiavellian, what we were describing before, Malayar's Hamas. The world is full of this bitter, brutal, bloody murder and thievery, and to which the point the Almighty says, okay, you know what? Got to start from scratch. This was a bad plan here. Something didn't work. We're going to start over. And I'm going to pick the one guy who has at least a saving grace. Now, I'm not going to deal with a theological question of that. It is, I definitely, I hear you all asking it and get ready to type it in your boxes there. But okay, like, didn't God know that the world would become dystopian and have to start over from scratch? And didn't he know that? And why didn't he create mankind better? And then why? Why ask why? Try but dry. That's the bottom line. No, I'm just kidding. It's a good question. And to understand it, we really would have to delve deeply into one of the topics we covered in the You Might Be a Heretic If series of the conundrum of mankind having free choice versus predetermination of the Almighty, or pre-knowledge of the Almighty, which we understand as predetermination. The two are intrinsically linked. Different philosophical topic. Check out You Might Be a Heretic If. You can find it on TorahAnytime.com or on rabbilandis.com. We need a lot more time for that. So suffice it to say, it's a great philosophical question, and we don't have time for it tonight, and we'll just leave it at that. But we see that as God does make the decision that he has to, so to speak, start from scratch, there's some interesting things that we see right at the beginning. And I'll throw one out. If you grew up with a nice, wonderful Eastern European bubby, grandma, Oma, whatever you call it, or Zadie's it too, who spoke Yiddish, they would often, you might have heard the phrase, ad 22, which in Yiddish means you should live to 120. Or somewhere in your Jewish life, you might have heard this concept of, you should live into 120, or after 120. You always hear this number thrown around that it seems that the Jewish ideal for life is 120 years. So where does that come from? So it's kind of more cultural than halachic or philosophical. That being said, there are two philosophical sources that were given for it. One is actually right here in this discussion, because at the beginning of the story, the Almighty says, and it's recorded in the Torah, again, this is the end of Parshas Bereishis, it says, Vihi kol yemei. No, it's not there. I'm gonna have to underline my first one quote so I don't keep doing this every week. Here we go. Vayomer Hashis, verse 3 of chapter 6. Vayomer Hashem lo yadon ruchi ba'adam la'olam b'shagam hu basar v'hayu yamav me'av esrim shana. Like, I can't deal with mankind like this anymore. They keep messing up. His days shall be 120 years. So that seemed pretty obvious. It sounds like, we went through the whole story of Bereishis, and we had all these people, because the end of the story of Bereishis, of Parshas Bereishis, is all really just the census of the time, and telling us each generation and how long the leader of the generation lived. And they're very long years, much longer than we live nowadays. Like we see that Adam lived 930 years, and then Seth lived, Sheth, his son Seth, lived 912 years, and Enosh lived 905 years, and on down, 900 years. They all lived around, somewhere around 900 to 1,000 years, right? And then all of a sudden God says, okay, got to start from scratch. And I'll give you the direct Hebrew for a minute. He says, "V'hayu yamav me'av esrim shana." His years will be 120 years, or he has 120 years. So there's two different interpretations of what that means. The Rashi's interpretation is, as we'll see, that when he gives Noach the task of building the ark, the process takes 120 years. So the simple understanding is here is that God is saying, I'm going to destroy the world in 120 years. The Ibn Ezra, the great Spanish rabbi, actually says, no, there's a philosophical idea here that the Almighty was limiting the years of mankind to 120. That originally, according to Kabbalistic literature, mankind after the garden, after, so to speak, death became a reality, mankind was limited to 1,000 years. And that's how you see everyone in Parshas Bereishis living roughly 1,000 years, give or take a decade or two, because we live in 1,000 years, you can give or take a decade. But says Ibn Ezra that after the garden, lifespan was 1,000 years. And when God, so to speak, restarts after the flood, lifespan is at that point 120 years. Okay, the obvious complication with that is we see that not everyone right away after the flood lives 120 years. Right? We see Noach himself lived, 700 something, I think. And then and then it's dwindling till we have Avram lives 175, and Yitzchak and Yaakov, and 150 something, 130 something, whatever it is. Now, finally, we have our first person that we can identify as living, as the Torah telling us lives 120 years, and that is Moshe Rabbeinu. So we see, back to those 26 years, the 16 from after the flood till Moshe, we see this shortening of years until we get down to Moshe's 120. And to the best of my knowledge, again, I'm sure I'm going to get 25 articles from some of you after tonight, especially Julie. I'm sure has some ready to go, Julie Kaufman. But I don't know if a human being has ever lived longer than 120 years. I don't know if we have a record. I think if you look in your Guinness Book of World Records, after you get by that guy with the funky fingernails whose sins are like this, then you get to that person who's lived the longest. And it's like, I don't know, maybe 106 years, 112 years, whatever it is. But I don't think they've broken 120. I'm sure you're all Googling it right now. I'll also be the articles to disprove what I'm saying. But suffice it to say, 120 seems to be about the cap for mankind. And we definitely take it from Moshe living 120 years. And philosophically, Ibn Ezra was even taking it right out of the flood story at the beginning to say that it's 120 years because of the flood and because things were messed up and we had to start from scratch. Okay. So the Almighty decides in his infinite wisdom that he's going to restart the world with a man named Noach. In other words, no one else is worthy of survival, seemingly, except for Noach. And we're told a verse that right away our sages argue on, because our sages argue on everything. The verse at the beginning of Parashas Noach says, Ela told us Noach, Noach ish tzadik, tamim hayu b'dorosav, es Elokim hisalech Noach, which translates as, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, pure in his times. He walked with Hashem. Noach walked with Hashem. So the Rav and Shmuel have the debate. Is that to say that when we say tzaddik tamim v'haya b'dorosav, that he was a righteous man in his generation, but had he lived in a much better generation, then for example, if he had lived in the generation of Noah, then he would have been that much greater, right? It's a whole nature nurture thing. Like I always quote from Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn says we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So says one opinion that Noach was great in his generation, and had he lived in a better generation, he would have been that much greater. Says the other opinion, Noah was great in his generation, but had he lived in a greater generation, he would have been a no one, right? Had he lived in a generation of Abraham, he would have been just an average Joe or an average Noah. Suffice it to say, he's the best we had in this generation, and therefore the Almighty decides he has to restart the world with Noah. Okay, now the Almighty decides in his infinite wisdom that the method for bringing the world to hit the ultimate reset, for those of you who grew up with PCs, I'm sorry, I was one. I had to convert a few years ago to be a Mac user. I'd go through a couple of years of therapy with that. But if you grew up with a PC, you had to hit Control Alt Delete to be able to do the reset. On the Mac, you just go up to the Apple and hit the reset button. But suffice to say, the Almighty is going to use water to reset the world. Now, why water? Well, quite simply, that if we look back to the creation story from 2 lectures ago, that we see that what was the world before it was a world, so to speak. What are we told over there right at the beginning? Right, Bereshis bara Elokim es Hashemayim v'haaretz. Va'aretz ha'isatov vo v'choshech al pnei atahom v'ruach Elokim chafetz al pnei hamayim, that the Spirit of the Almighty hovered above the waters, that somehow before creation, whatever that means, or the first substance there was water. So the Almighty says, okay, we're going to recreate with water. And we talked about last week with the Garden of Eden, that the only thing we know about the Garden of Eden is seemingly it was the source of all the water in the world. So this concept, water, life, very much intertwined. That's why the Almighty decides, so to speak, that's the method of destroying the world. Now, I'm going to kind of interplay and interlude a little bit with, this is a history class, it's not just a Chumash class. And while the Torah is not a history book, we are given historical lessons, and the simple Jewish idea is ein mikra yotze midei pshuto, that a verse does not leave its simple meaning that we can definitely take homiletic ideas from verses. We take philosophical ideas from verses. We have the whole homiletics of Judaism, which we call Agadic literature, the Medrash Agadita, the Talmud Agadita, which definitely expounds on verses and gives all kinds of homiletic ideas. But at its core, we say a verse does not go out from a simple meaning. And therefore, if the Torah says something happens, we start with a simple meaning and assume that there's historical accuracy to that. Now, I have to be honest that so far, or probably one of the main places in the Chumash where that is probably one of the most difficult, is actually the flood story. Now, why is it difficult? Because, well, at least at some level, the reason there's a difficulty to it is because, like everything in the Torah, it's been there's the whole school of biblical archaeology, and there's biblical archaeologists who try to validate the Torah, right, or what we call biblical authenticists, right? People who believe in that the Torah is authentic as history, and then there's people who try to disprove the Torah through archaeology, right? Some of the famous names, and again, I'm not a big, I wish I knew more about archaeology because I'm fascinated by it, but some of the famous names in the biblical authenticist camp are Vendell Jones, who people like to say the character of the Harrison Ford character, Indiana Jones, was based on him. I don't think it's true. I think it's a coincidence. But Vendell Jones is one of the famous biblical authenticists who always tried to prove the Bible through archaeology. One of the famous people on the other side was Kathleen Kenyon, one of the great anti-Semites of world history, who always tried to disprove the Torah through archaeology. Bottom line is, like any science, not that's a science, but any area of study, especially when you were taking pieces of pottery and debating whether they came from 2,500 years ago or 3,000 years ago, whether they're made by this guy or that guy. There's going to be a lot of room for debate on both sides. But suffice it to say that archaeologists have been looking for proof to the Great Deluge since time immemorial. And I'll just, and again, you can Google it. There's going to be many articles, both directions, many scientific articles. I would say many scientific articles, both directions. I'll say one more caveat before we delve into this, that there, in general, in academia, there is a bias against biblical authenticity. Now you might say, well, of course, they're academics, they know better, they're smarter, they're more analytic. I don't think that's true. I think it's cultural as much as it's intellectual. Again, I'm not going to say there aren't wonderful intellectual arguments raised, and I'd love to have those debates. But I think in general, we do find in academia a bias against biblical authenticity. But that being said, you do definitely have, I won't say an equal amount of articles from biblical authenticity scholars, I'm probably saying that wrong. Someone will correct me on that too. But people who believe in biblical authenticity and their scholarship, but there are. And so while there's definitely no shortage of articles that tell you the flood couldn't happen, there's no proof there's no proof in carbon dating. There's no proof in archaeology. You won't find anything to say there's ever a great deluge that covered the whole world. There are at least three things that I think we do know. Number one is the concept of a deluge wiping out a society in antiquity was not uncommon. Let's face it. This was not uncommon because they didn't have dams and levees and all these wonderful ways to control water. And major water bodies do flood, right? The whole sustenance of the Egyptian people from time immemorial, probably maybe still today in many ways, came from the Nile flooding and then rescinding. And when it would flood, it'd take, 20,000 people with it. But that's how the soil around the Nile bank stayed fertile. The Tigris and Euphrates, we know, would flood and rescind. These are major bodies of water would do this. So the concept of a great deluge wiping out a society in antiquity is not uncommon. Let's just get that on the table. So even the historical argument is yes, great deluge, not great deluge, is not were there great deluges that wiped out society. Everyone agrees with that. That wiped out societies with a small s, but the concept that there might have been one that wiped out everybody, or that all those were at the same time, or that the academic won't give credence to. And to that I say, why not? Because it says in the Torah. Right? You admit that the concept of deluges, the great floods wiping out societies, happens, right? And we know that for sure in antiquity and even in modern days that society is based on water. that society is built around water. No water, no society. Either for sustenance, as having having the water to use for food and for drink, or for travel. Right? Like we always, my former hometown, Cincinnati, that we always, I always like to talk about how Cincinnati in the year 1900 was the second largest Jewish community in North America outside New York. And that's the reason why, Eliezer Silver, the chief rabbi in North America, was there a little bit after that. That's where the Hebrew Union College and Reformed Judaism of America was founded there, because that was the place outside New York. Why? Because of the Ohio River. And because of that was the main mode of transportation. The main mode of commerce was around the Ohio River. So this major megatropolis of Cincinnati centered around the Ohio River. The problem was, as railroads became a thing, the equivalent of the steamboat lobby at the time kept the railroads out of Cincinnati, where they wanted to build, so they could have the railroads and the rivers in the river in the same place. And instead, they went to Chicago, and Chicago became the major hub of the Midwest. And Cincinnati, I'm sorry to tell my Cincinnati friends in the class today, but Cincinnati became just a second-rate town who still thinks they're a first-rate town. That's what happened at that time. And then Chicago let in the railroads and let in the airport. And because, as Steve Selnick says in his great book, Start With Why, they looked at themselves as being not a hub for the railroads, or like in Cincinnati, a hub for the riverboat, but a hub for transportation. And it's transportation that drives society, not a specific mode of transportation. So okay, we know these facts. Society is always around water. Water overflowed and killed people. Could it happen at the same time? Could it not? I don't know. Why not? Right? So just the science of it and the history of it, you say, oh, there's no proof to it. There's a general rule over here that is often ignored. The lack of evidence is not the evidence of lack, right? Like one of my teachers always like to say, that we know that the ancient Israelites used wireless communication. How do we know this? Because archaeologists have been digging in Israel for decades and generations, and they never found any wires. So therefore, we know that the ancient Israelites used wireless communication, right? That's ridiculous, because the lack of evidence is not the evidence of lack. So I would say to the academic wants to say, there's no proof whatsoever of a mass flood, right? Of a great deluge. But is there evidence of a lot of deluges? Do we see a lot of societies definitely were wiped out by deluges? Yeah, that we see. Okay, so that's a start. Now, what's interesting is there's a book that I'll recommend if this topic fascinates you, and if it bores you and you're ready to move on to the next one, we'll get there soon. But there's a book that came out, I believe, in the year 2000 or somewhere thereabouts, and the book is called Noah's Flood, written by William Ryan and Walter Pittman, published by Simon Schuster. And these were two geologists, because let's face it, the study of whether or not there was a great deluge usually centers around either geology or paleontology, right? Those are the two areas, geology being the study of rocks, paleontology being the study of fossils. Those are the two main areas of study that try and prove this. So they were two geologists who wrote a work where they referred to, and this comes up in a lot of these articles if you're interested, that the proof, the geological proof, the carbon dating, etc., that somewhere between 7,500 years ago and as much as maybe 18,000 years ago, based on carbon dating, there was the Black Sea had a great deluge with waterfalls bigger than what we know as Niagara Falls, and stretched further than that. And definitely wiped out a lot of society. And their book, brought all the scientific geological proof to this great Black Sea flood. And let's face it, the Black Sea is in Mesopotamia, is in the part of the world we're talking about. They also bring proof that there was a great dispersion after the flood. Now, they don't go as far as to say the Tower of Babel. They say, no, it's probably people running away from the flood were dispersing. Okay, but again, the facts are kind of lining up based on this one work. So again, I'm not going to say that with this article in this book, you're not going to find 10 others or 20 others that say it's ridiculous. But all I'm saying is I think that principle, when we talk about history and Torah and these things, that the evidence of lack is not the lack of evidence. And a lot of things do line up. And number one is that when you look at ancient cultures, that but most ancient cultures have a flood story. One of the most famous being the Babylonian tale of Gilgamesh. But far beyond Gilgamesh, you could, again, Google if you're interested, almost every culture has the sort of a great deluge. Now, I would say that, quoting my wonderful wife, that she used to quote a friend of hers to say that if one person tells you have a tail, you can ignore it. But if two people tell you have a tail, you better darn well look. Right. So if you see that every culture has a story of a great flood, wiping out society as we know it, wiping out mankind as we know it, well, there's one or two options. Either they all have the same fairy tale teller, right? They all read, Mother Goose, and they all had the same publishers, and there was some sort of unity between all these different cultures, even though the cultures are as far flung as China and the Native Americans. But you can say that some of them are all united, or you can say, like I said, that every society had deluges, and most deluges, I think that's plural, and most societies thought of their society as the whole entire world, and therefore they had such a myth. Okay, but again, a lot of facts line up to say that to write this off, this is a myth, this is a fairy tale, a fable. Yeah, okay, I don't think you gotta go that far. Once you put God into the equation, it's possible to say it all happened at the same time, and it was all to hit a great reset, and that's what the Almighty needed to do, and that's what the Almighty wanted to do, and that's what I, as a biblical authenticist, would say, and be willing to make the argument against the academic who likes to say the Torah is nothing but a book of folklore and fairy tales. Okay, I'm going to take a quick pause for questions. We're a little bit later than we usually pause. I know there's a couple things in the chat here. Want to get those first, and then we'll see if anyone else has anything to say. So Joanne said there's a lady in France who was 117 fairly recently. Someone texted me privately that someone was 122. Again, it's going to be around 120, give or take. I remember an article of a lady who lived to be like 110, drinking one Dr. Pepper every day, right? Because a doctor a day keeps the doctor away, right? Isn't that what they say? Okay, Joanne made the point that we just made about multiple flood stories, and right. So she I didn't see that till now, but Joanne's really writing my notes for tonight. And someone texted me privately that again, I think I made this point also, that regional flood would seem global to people in antiquity. I agree. Right, I agree that no one in Mesopotamia knew there was much of the world outside of Mesopotamia. No one in Native America and the Americas knew there was much of the world outside of America. That there was, right, societies were not united in any way, shape, or form. Oh, there's a comment there. Julie posted. Yeah, I agree. I hear you. But to put it this way, and I know Julie's gonna get upset with me for this. I'm not picking on anyone in this, but I often think that the dogma of the questioner is just as great, if not greater, than the dogma of the rabbi. So that's maybe something we can debate a little bit later and talk about, but I think that is quite often the case. Okay, before we continue, any other questions, thoughts about what we said so far? I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but we're going to get a lot more into now the timeline and the history of what I hope at least made somewhat of a compelling case is historically accurate. So okay. Anyone, any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, let's keep moving. And then again, keep your questions till the end because we'll have time for all of them, God willing. Okay, the timeline of events. So we meet Noah. We meet Noah, as he's called in Hebrew, in the year 1656, which is 2,105 years before the Common Era. Now, as we mentioned before, from the time that the Almighty makes his decision to destroy the world until the world is actually destroyed was 120 years. Now, what happens in that 120 years? Well, that's the time that God says to Noah, go build this great ark and collect all the animals, 2 of all the non-kosher animals and 14 of all the kosher animals. Why more kosher animals than non-kosher animals? The answer is because only kosher animals can be used for korbanos, can be used for sacrifices. So we wanted more of those around so they could repopulate as well as be used for the korbanos, the sacrifices. And but God says do it 120 years. Now, let's face it, the ark, just by reading the story, as it's told to us, the ark is a structure of it's a miraculous structure, right? Just if you they're down in Kentucky, I think Claremont, Kentucky is the name of the city. There's the Bible Museum. I think it's called the Bible Museum, which I visited once because I was going to take a trip down there of our group in Cincinnati, but I want to check it out first. And then I realized the whole place is really just a missionizing place. So the Creation Museum, right? Thanks, Nomi. The Creation Museum is really just a missionizing place. And there was nothing to work with there. Really. The place was very well done. A lot of money went into it, but just like, it's almost entertaining. But it's a very missionizing and quite ridiculous and a lot of things to say. But I went after my good friend, Jeff Harris, Jerry's son, went to tell me about it. But one thing they did, which I do want to do, and I think I would even take my family to this because I would not take them to the Creation Museum, but they built a replica of Noah's Ark. And based on what we see in the Chumash, and one thing is for certain that if you go and see it, or you just look at the pictures, that structure ain't going to float, right? And not only is that structure not going to float, but that structure is not going to have room for all these animals, all the Noah and his family on one layer, all the animals on another layer, all the refuse on another layer. It's not big enough. If you add up, it's not big enough. It's clearly a miraculous structure. Not only that, but we had the concept of what is the Chumash says, Tzoar Ta'aseh L'Teva. There was some sort of light stone that gave light to the thing. It's a miraculous vehicle, a miraculous vessel. And the question is, if we're already dealing with what is clearly described as a miraculous vessel, why in the world does God not speed things up? And not only that, but 120 years sounds like a long time. I mean, regardless, and we talk about the great temple again. Noah was one guy. The Herod's temple was hundreds of thousands of slaves, but still, like 120 years seems like a long time. And once it's miraculous, like just speed the thing up and get over with. What's the whole thing about the 120 years? So, quite simply, is what happens if you are a guy who decides to build a big ark the size of 3 football fields, 3 stories tall, in the middle of Mesopotamia, circa 2105 before the Common Era. Most people are going to stop you and say, like, what are you up to? Oh, I'm building an ark. Why? There's going to be a great flood. We're all going to die. Do tshuva, repent, right? That's what would happen. And an absolutely ridiculous movie that gave a amazing representation of this was a movie called Evan Almighty. With Steve Carell played Noah or Evan, right? They played the Noah figure, and the movie was so ridiculously stupid on so many levels. But the one thing that I think they did a wonderful job of is bringing home what it must have been like for Noah, what it must have been like for Noah, with the whole world being like, "Well, you're crazy. What are you doing?" And no one listening to the call, no one listening to what he was trying to wake the world up to. But that's why it took so long. The Almighty says, "I'm giving him 120 years to either shape up or ship out." Literally, shape up or ship out. And maybe that's where the phrase comes from. I don't know. Julie, you'll tell me if I'm right or not. So the be it as it may, that's why it takes so long. So people ask the question, they'll see it, and our sages tell us that they wanted to kill Noah. That Noah had to be protected constantly from the bands of people who thought he was so crazy and so ridiculous, and that he kept preaching about this great flood, and they tried to kill him. And it was only through miracles that he was saved from being killed. Now, how many people does Noah influence with his methodology? Exactly 0, right? There's not one person who wasn't originally intended to go on the ark, who's allowed on the ark, who changed his mind, who grew up, who woke up, right? So as far as an outreach worker, Noah is not too successful, right? He does not have a lot of success, and he does not influence anyone in his 120 years, but that suffices to say, the Almighty gave everyone a chance, 120 years, and even when the time comes, after spending all this time trying to influence people, building the ark, getting all the animals, getting everything together, 120 years, when the time comes, we're told that Noah, again, by our rabbis, that Noah has to literally be carried onto the ark by the floodwaters until the flood's really coming, and he's knee deep, and he has to be carried on with the floodwaters, because we say that even Noah, again, on the opinion that he was the best of the generation, but doesn't hold a candle to Abraham in that generation. Still, we see he was Makatne Amana. He had a certain lack of faith that when push came to shove, he did not run onto the ark and start sailing away. So finally, after 120 years into the process, the rainwaters begin on the 17th day of Mar Cheshvan. Now, a lot of Jewish calendars make the mistake and call it the month Cheshvan because those calendar publishers think that Mar is just a adjective for the month Cheshvan, and that really the month is called Cheshvan, and Mar was just added on because Mar means bitter. And the reason that the month is called Bitter Cheshvan is because that's when the flood happened. That is a theoretical idea that comes up, but if you look at a lot of ancient sources, and I believe all our Jewish months really come from the Babylonians anyways, the actual name is Mar Cheshvan. But one of the things we say more homiletically is it's called Mar Cheshvan because Mar means bitter, and that's the month where the flood started. So the flood starts on the 17th day of Mar Cheshvan. That's when the rain begins. The 40 days and 40 nights. So as we all know from our, from Hebrew school or day school or whatever it was, that the rains fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So that concludes on the 27th day of Kislev, meaning that's when the rain stops falling. That doesn't mean it's over at that point, right? I think that a lot of people have the misconception that the whole thing lasted 40 days. No, the rain rained for 40 days straight. So it's kind of like living in Seattle. That's what happened to people at that time. It rained literally 40 days straight, and that was enough rain to fill the world. Now the Torah does tell us that it really came in both directions. It wasn't just rain for 40 days. It was also all the well springs and natural water sources overflowing as well. So the waters really come from both directions, and that happens for a total of 40 days, 40 nights. After 40 days, 40 nights, the whole thing just floats around for a while. So from the 27th of Kislev till the first day of the month of Sivan, which is the month we're almost in. So think about from Hanukkah time till Shavuos time. Give or take 6 months, right? Is that 6 months? I think 6 months. That's how long these waters just stood on the earth, right? So again, kind of an interesting concept that if the goal was to reset mankind and animal kind, that it doesn't take 6 months. Why so long? I don't know. Good question. I don't have a good answer to that. But be it as it may, it was not until the 1st of Sivan, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, when the waters began to subside. 16 days later, the ark touches down on what we're told is Mount Ararat, and we assume, or archaeologists like to assume, that that's Mount Ararat of today in modern-day Turkey, that's where the ark comes to a rest. On the first day of the month of Av, so again, we go Sivan, Tammuz, Av. We're 6 weeks later now. The peaks of the mountains start to show over the surface of the water, and on the 10th day of the month of Elul, Noah sends out the first bird. Now, the first bird that Noah sends out is a raven. The question is, it's kind of interesting that he starts with a raven and then he switches to a dove. The question is, why start with a raven? Why switch to a dove? What's with the birds, right? What's the birds over here? So, and by the way, it's not because Edgar Allan Poe was on the ark. We already said it was just Noah and his family, no Edgar Allan Poe. So that's not why the raven was there. Badum ching. So the reason is because the raven is a carnivorous bird, right? Ravens eat carcasses, eat dead bodies, right? They're carnivorous. I think it's probably a better word. I'm just blanking on it right now due to the lack of sleep from our campaign and other things. But it's a bird that would eat human flesh or animal flesh. So the first test that Noah wanted to, so to speak, figure out was is there still human flesh lying around? In other words, are these ravens going to have birds of prey? Thank you, Nomi. Are these ravens going to have what to sustain themselves on? In other words, is there going to be prey for the birds of prey? And so to speak, that'd be the first, maybe the sign of life would be these dead bodies. Now, why? Because if you were the people who weren't lucky enough to be on the ark, which was the rest of mankind, you weren't going to necessarily just stay in your houses, but you're going to probably seek out the highest, as the flood started taking over the world, you're going to seek out the highest point. So Noah figured in his knowledge that the first thing that was going to show, first sign of life, so to speak, was going to be humans and animals. So he sent out the raven to try and find sustenance, figuring if the raven found sustenance, it would stay. But no, the raven went out and came back. So meaning the waters hadn't subsided enough. Okay, so Noah waits another week, and then he sends out, he's a little more ambitious this time. He sends out the dove, which is a not a bird of prey. It's a herbivore. It just eats vegetation. Again, same idea that if the trees had come above the water and it started to bloom and to give off branches and leaves and all these other things, that he would find what to eat. And then, Noah would realize they were that much closer to getting out of the ark. Dove comes back and with a branch showing that there's something. And then he sends out the dove again. I'm sorry, since the first time, comes back with nothing. Sends the dove out the second time on the 23rd of Elul, it comes back with an olive branch. Right, the ultimate sign of peace, right there, it comes from there. And then the first of Tishrei, which by the way is Rosh Hashanah, he sends out the dove, and the dove never comes back because the water is gone. He's able to build a nest, and Noah realizes that it's almost over. Now they're still on the ark for 2 more months. Okay, because we're told that they don't come out till the 27th of Cheshvan, basically a year and 10 days later. So which begs the question, like if already by Rosh Hashanah it seemed like they were good to go, why a month, almost 2 months later? And I'll really make a better question is we know that he couldn't come out of the ark till God commanded him to, right? And one could be up to him. So what's with the birds anyways? I don't have a good answer to that, right? I don't have a good answer as to, if anyone give me a good answer, like why is he, actually I have a thought, but I don't know if it's a good answer. The thought is it's just human psychology, right? That it's Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, that people build their own prisms of life, their own Weltanschauung, as we would say in Yiddish or German. They build their own constructs and they live life according to their constructs. So to Noah, that even though, okay, he couldn't go out till the Almighty said, well, if he at least had some signs, it would make it easier on him. That's what I think is probably the understanding. Don't know if it's true. Didn't see any rabbis with bigger shoulders than me to say it, but just something to think about. Okay, so that's roughly the story. Now, what happens when Noah comes out is not pretty. So we start off with all these accolades, Ish Tzaddik, a righteous man, Tamim B'Dorosav, he walked with Hashem, all these wonderful things about Noah. And then we get to the end of the story and it ain't so pretty. First of all, we refer to him as something else. We don't give him all the accolades anymore of being righteous and walking with God. We say, Veichal Noach Isha Adama. Noah really debased himself. How so? Because the very first thing that Noah builds in the new world is a bar. Or a vineyard, right? he wants to get drunk, and that's the first thing he does. He wants to get drunk. He figures out how to get drunk. He makes his vineyard, makes his wine, and he gets drunk. Now, again, I don't blame Noah. I don't blame Noah at all. I mean, think about it. For those of us who, we often refer to our collective generation. I know our class is a little multi-generational here, but at least the collective generation we refer to as the Sheres of Plato. We are the remnants of the Jewish people from the destruction of Europe. And all of us knew survivors, whether they were our parents, our grandparents, friends, we all knew survivors. We all know survivors. We still have some survivors with us. And let's face it, many of the survivors who went through the hell of Nazi Germany or Nazi Europe just gave up afterwards, right? They just want to take a drink and numb the pain and forget about it all. And that was Noach. That was really Noach, and that's why Noach, we see, is not going to be privileged to build a people, and not going to be privileged to be our great patriarch, because again, we're not judging him, because we say he's no longer a tzaddik, no longer calling him a righteous person. We say he's just Isha Adama. He's just a normal guy now, right? Because again, that's what he went through. Simcha Wasserman, who was a survivor of the war, he survived the war as a child, writes that he was like Noach. He could be sympathetic to Noach because Noach lived in 3 worlds. He lived in the antediluvian world, in other words, the post-flood, the pre-flood world. He lived in the flood world and lived in the post-diluvian world, and there were 3 different worlds. So Simcha Wasserman used to say those who survived the war had the same experience because they lived in pre-war Europe, which was one world. They lived in war-tattered Europe during the Holocaust, which was a totally different world, and then they lived in the post-World War II reconstruction of the world, whether in America or Israel or England or wherever they went. And again, a totally different world. So that was Noah. He saw 3 different worlds, like the survivors. And again, you can't blame people. You just the trauma of living through that. You can't blame people. And that's what you see right there with Noah. That's what he does. He just gets drunk. He's sodomized by one of his sons. Sodomized, castrated. It's unclear. Throwing out all the commentaries here for you, for those who want to know. But be it as it may, it's not a very happy ending for Noah. And therefore we see that he starts off great, but he ends off, not so great. That being said, he is, we do remember him for what he did. Because let's face it, he is the forefather of all mankind. We don't talk about, when we talk about mankind, we don't refer to mankind quite usually as B'nai Adam. We do sometimes, but usually we don't refer to mankind as B'nai Noach, the children of Noah, because everyone descends not from, we do descend from Adam also, but we descend from Noach. We want to, center it in and zone in a little bit more. We do, we still name our children after him and remember him in many ways as a great person, but he definitely was seemingly definitely not the righteous who would be like Abraham, who we're going to see next week, could withstand 10 major tests and still be Abraham, because after the flood, he is Isha Adama. He just turns into a plain old guy. Now, just a couple things over here. I have an outline here. I see the science of it because there were just 2 more points to mention that because I did mention the idea of many diluvian stories and the idea of the book of Noah's flood, which sees some at least some sort of great flood in the Mesopotamian area, roughly the years we're talking. Carbon dating, how exact is it? Let's face it, I don't know. Maybe yeah, maybe no, but be it as it may, at least close. But there are some other theories. Again, this is one thing they talk about in the book Noah's Ark, is that this was it seemed to coincide with the late glacial period. That when we look at world history, we have one of 2 geological time periods we can live in. We can live in a glacial period or a greenhouse period, or as it's commonly called by Disney, the ice ages or the non-ice ages, right? Glacial period is ice ages, and right now we're living in a greenhouse period. So many understand that this was the end of the most recent glacial period, and so therefore as the ice caps and the icebergs and the Goldbergs all melting, and that's what caused the flood. I don't know how that fits in with everything else we said. If that helps people to believe it, fine. But I don't know how that would fit in with the other stuff we said in the previous weeks. There are those who want to go as far as to say, but this is more of like the creationists who say that a meteorite hit the world and caused the big flood. I don't know. Again, I think neither of those theories sit well with me, but they are theories you will see. I think that the theories we said are stronger to rely upon. Now, what's interesting, so I don't even know what I meant here. The world before the world, right? So right. I already talked about the concept of 120 years. Now, one other thing that comes out is interesting is we refer to as there's a concept that you may or may not be familiar with called the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws or the Noahide code. Now, what's interesting is we kind of give Noah credit for the 7 Noahide laws, but really they were the Adamic code, right? Not the Noahide code or the Noahide laws, the Adamic code or the Adamic laws, because we understand most of them are actually commanded to Adam, and only the last of them was referred to was commanded to Noah. I mean, the last of not eat a limb from a live animal, but the rest of them were all already commanded to Adam. These are not always so easy to find in the verse of the Torah, where we learn these more through rabbinic sources, but the idea is this. I remember hearing from one of my teachers a story. This is actually Rabbi Orlovsky, who we had on a few weeks ago, that there was a non-Jewish secretary in the day school that he grew up in who once made a comment on a rainy day that, if it doesn't stop raining, you people are going to have to build an ark. To which Rabbi Orlovsky responds, well, what do you mean we people? And he said, well, you're Jewish. Yeah. Well, Noah was a Jew, wasn't he? Well, Noah was 10 generations before Abraham, and Abraham was the first proto-Jew, so how could Noah be a Jew? To which the secretary responds, well, the whole world out there thinks that Noah was Jewish. To which Rabbi Lasky responds, well, you better go correct them, right? Noah is not Jewish, right? Because we don't start the beginning of the Jewish people till next week with Abraham. But one thing that we do see is that the code we attribute to Noah is the Noahide code, because as we said a couple lectures ago, as Jews, we're not just concerned with ourselves. Yes, we believe that the Torah is a special relationship, it's a special job of bringing godliness into the world that we have. But the Torah talks to everyone, and the Torah tells everyone how to live. So there's the concept for the non-Jew of keep the seven, go to heaven. That there's the seven Noahide laws that non-Jew has to follow to, so to speak, earn their place in the world to come. From our perspective, and they are don't worship idols. Don't bless God. That's a euphemism, meaning don't curse God. Don't murder. Don't have illicit relationships or illicit relations. Have a civil law system. Have a court system, and don't eat the limb of a live animal. Now, you might look at those and say, "Oh, that's easy. They get off pretty easy." It's not so easy. That when you look at how these laws are expounded upon in different codes of Jewish law, these are really general categories. So when you start to expand the seven into all the categories, it ends up being almost more like a 3-to-1 relationship. It's not like we have 613 and they have 7. It's that their 7 expand probably a lot more. And our 613, as we know, as we said, I believe last week, that no one person can observe all 613 unless they're both male, female, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, live inside and outside the land of Israel at the same time, and are both married and divorced. So that maybe it's about a 3-to-1 from the Jew to the Gentile, but be it as it may, that it's the lesson is important. And you do have different groups of Gentiles who do try to follow the Noahide laws. We mentioned Wendell Jones before. Wendell Jones stayed a Gentile, but has a whole church, or I don't know what they call it, but where they follow the 7 Noahide laws. But that's really is mostly commanded to Adam, we understand, but culminates with being commanded to Noah after the great deluge. Okay, last point on Noah, and then we'll open up with questions. Noah has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafes. Ham is the one that we understand to have perpetrated the terrible acts on his father that we mentioned before. Shem is our great-great-great-grandfather. In other words, the great 10 generations grandfather to Abraham. And he is a monotheist. We see that he is a monotheist, and we'll talk about him more next week. But he definitely carries a torch of monotheism in a world that we're going to see still has a lot of issues with polytheism. And so we basically have that Shem's the good kid, Ham's the bad kid, and Yafes ends up kind of being in the middle. And the way that one of my teachers, Rav Nachman Blumenzatzal, used to say is that is essentially how history plays out. The descendants of Ham, in many ways, have challenges. The descendants of Shem, not all perfect, but at least there's the attempt at living a moralistic, monotheistic life, whereas Yafes has the choice. Yafes we kind of understand as Greek, and that part of the world, Greek culture, we kind of attribute to him. It depends on how it goes. If it sort of placates itself towards Shem, it can be great. If it placates itself, or not placates, if it points itself towards Ham, then it can be terrible. And that's the struggle that the Yafes has throughout all of life. But that's the 3 sons of Noah. We'll continue our story next week with Shem, who is our antecedents, our ancestor, and we will continue on from there. I thank you all for coming. I thank you for listening, and I'll stay on as long as you guys have questions. So we have one thing here in the chat box. What is the history of sacrifices pre-Abraham and pre-temple? Well, it's actually a great question. So it's a great question. We'll talk more when we talk about the Mishkan, because it's a big debate. In Rashi and Ramban is the 2 of the main philosophers, but definitely we see that Adam brought sacrifices. We see that Cain and Abel brought sacrifices. We see that Noah brought sacrifices, etc. So we see there were sacrifices, but as I think Joanne's alluding to with her question, there's no temple yet. That's true, because we understand, at least the way that the Rashi and the Sforno understand it, is that the idealistic state of the world was actually not to have a Mishkan or a temple. The need for a Mishkan and then later a temple was only in a post golden calf world. In other words, only after the Jews transgressed the golden calf is there even a need for a temple and later first a Mishkan and then a temple. But it seems like according to Rashi and Sforno that without that, they bring up verses at the end of Parshas Yisro where we have the story of the 10 statements at Sinai from Shavuos. This is talk about our holiday about to come up, where after the Decalogue, after the 10 statements are said by Moshe, it says, "V'yomar Hashem Moshe, ko somar el bnei Israel." That God says to Moses, say to the all Jewish people, "Atem isim ki mina shamayim debarti machem." You all see now that I spoke to you from heaven. Lo sasun iti Elohei kesef Elohei zahav. Don't you dare make images of gold and silver to be intermediaries from me to you. Lo sasu lechem. Don't make them. Mizbeach adama ta'asuli. Have an altar, have a ground altar to me. V'zevachta lav es olasecha, and offer on it your elevation offerings, es shalamecha, and your peace offerings, es sonecha, and your sheep, es bakarecha, and your cattle. B'chol hamakom asher ezker es shemi, because every place where you call out my name, avo elecha v'avarechecha, I will come to you and I will bless you. So the way that Sforno understands that is after Mount Sinai, before the golden calf, there was no need for a temple, no need for a Mishkan. That anywhere where a person felt they want to connect to the Almighty through a korban, through a closeness, that they're able to do it. And seemingly that's how it was practiced before, for sure before this point. That's how Adam did it. That's how Cain and Abel did it. That's how Noah did it. That's how Abraham's gonna do it. How Isaac's gonna do it. How Jacob's gonna do it. All the way until we eventually get to having a Mishkan. So, but again, a big debate though about what was just a temporary setup or what was the ideal. We'll get to that in a few weeks. Okay. And the other. So Moshe Rabbeinu was told to make the tabernacle after the one in heaven because of the golden calf. Could you repeat about no intended earthly temple? Right. So there's a debate on one side of the debate. And again, we'll get to this in a couple of weeks. So I don't want to go too deep into it tonight, but there's a debate on one side of the debate. We have Nachmanides. And on the other side of the debate, we have Rashi and the Sforno. Nachmanides says that the plan for the Mishkan and then later the temple was part of the original plan. And that the commandment to build the Mishkan was actually before the golden calf, and just the actualization was after the cleanup of the golden calf. That's Nachmanides' position. Rashi and the Sforno say no, that we see from the verses I just read at the end of Parshas Yisro. The idealistic state was there was no need for a Mishkan or later a temple or a synagogue, or don't tell the people who collect synagogue dues, but there's no need because God says, bring a sacrifice, mizbeach adama, have an altar on the ground. Bring your elevation offerings, bring your peace offerings. Wherever you call out to me, I'll come to you and I'll bless you. Right? That's what the Almighty says after Mount Sinai. So Rashi and Sforno understand that to mean that was what was going to happen if it wasn't for the golden calf messing things up and making it necessary to then have a Mishkan and a temple. Again, talk about it in a few weeks. We'll go more into depth into this question. It is a fascinating question and a fascinating debate, both in philosophy and history. So we'll get to that a little bit more at that point. Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns, good jokes, bad jokes, anything to say? Okay, so I will bid you all a good night. I'll remind everyone one more time our special program we have Thursday evening for Mindy Klein's third yard site, the third annual Mindy Klein Memorial Lecture. You'll be able to catch it on TorahAnytime.com/PITC. If you get my emails, you have that link in the email. And it's going to be hopefully a very inspirational evening where we'll be inspired both by his life and times and different lessons that we've all taken from him and the continuing of his legacy. So I will wish you all a good evening. I thank you all again for participating tonight and for participating in the campaign. And I look forward to having an amazing year together. And have a good night.
Good night, Rabbi.
Take care, Steve. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne.
Pleasure, always.
Thank you, Gary.
From Miami.
We had Miami, we had Cincinnati, we had Atlanta. This was on social media and all kinds of other places. So we were covering the globe here tonight. So okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be well, everybody.
Bye-bye.